Hello, everybody. This is Patrick Haggerty doing another session of Aunt Patty's Lavender Hour. Today, we have a special guest and an old friend and political comrade. His name is Andre Powell.
Good
It's really a
afternoon.
pleasure. Hey, it's really neat to have you because, in fact, you and I go way back. So, you were born in Baltimore,
Yep.
and tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, I'm the youngest of six children. Um, I grew up in Baltimore County, and I lived there until age 26. And it's a wonderful experience growing up in the county. I grew up in a part that had big, spacious yards. Everybody did. And I grew up in a part of Overlea that was called Cherry Heights. It was a small black community of only about 25 families that made up the black section.
I heard your parents met at work.
Yes, they both worked at a can factory. And it was through an act of kindness. My mother was new. My father saw her and thought she wasn't feeling well and went over to ask her how she was. She said she didn't feel good. He said, go rest in the restroom for a little while and I'll take care of the line. And from out of that, they started dating. And that's where the family of six comes from.
So you were the youngest of six, and it sounds like your family life was pretty harmonious.
It was actually living in the county is just a wonderful place to bring up children. Even though as a teenager, my teenage friends and I, the teenage group we hung out with was about 4 or 5 people. That's how small the community was out of 25 homes. There weren't very many people.
Yeah, I can understand that. So when you were 21, I heard that's what started your political life.
Yes, I was 21 years old and I was at the Baltimore City Fair, and that's where I met people from Baltimore Gay Alliance. Um, Having realized I was gay at age 15, and when I found Baltimore Gay Alliance, I latched onto them like a leech. We had 40 of us met every 2 weeks, and we had gay dances. We had a gay switchboard for uh, people to call and be able to talk to somebody. You must realize this was in 1975. It was a completely different world in terms of the LGBTQ two spirit community. We had social outreach. We had a health health committee and a political action committee that actually went to the state legislature to try and lobby for passage of an anti-discrimination bill each year.
Sounds like exactly what I was doing in Seattle at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle was the first big city to pass it.
That's and right.
Yeah.
One of the early ones.
I did all that. Wasn't it shortly after that you turned yourself into a screaming Marxist bitch like me?
Well, I don't know if I was screaming at the time.
I think you probably were.
No, I was relatively quiet and learning. I was working at a job for college students at the post office, and I happened to be there in 1975, and I happened to see a guy I recognized from my senior high school. So he started talking about socialism and how rotten capitalism was, and that it uses racism to promote divisions among people based on nationalities and ethnicities, and that keeps the people divided and fighting each other instead of uniting and joining together to take on the murderous system, horrendous system of capitalism, which is only meant to enrich the bankers and business people, keeping more and more money in their pockets.
I get it. That must have been an eye opener.
Well, it was as I started to learn more and more over the years. He and I both met a group called Workers' World Party that we were with for a while.
You continued as a Marxist in Workers' World Party for quite a while, right?
For a number of years, yes, indeed, and that is where we ran into each other, as I believe.
Yeah, that was in somewhere in the mid '80s when we met up. You had some adventures politically abroad, right?
Yes, I have. The earliest one was I've been to Cuba twice as a member of the Venceremus Brigade in 1991. The Venceremus Brigade, for those that aren't aware, is a sort of solidarity trip where you spend time in Cuba for 2 weeks. At this point, it's 2 weeks, and you learn about the country. You travel around the area that you're staying in. You visit some of the CDRs, Committees for Defense of the Revolution, several nights a week. We go to a community, and their CDR would have a party with the tremendous spread of food. We get to actually meet the people in Cuba. Those of us on the brigade, we had a lesbian gay sort of caucus that formed there on the brigade, and it had about, oh gosh, I don't know, 13, 14, 15, 16 people.
Let me talk about this a little bit, because I was in Venceremus myself in 1970.
The real early days.
Yeah, not 71 it was.
Mm-hmm.
We were there for 4 months. And we formed a gay caucus.
Mm-hmm.
There were 6 of us. It was highly controversial, a real hot button. The Cubans were learning about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And were at that time, they had an anti-gay proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't take Cuba very long. 20 years is a short time for any kind of movement to turn the whole thing around.
It should be noted, Cuba was the 1959 revolution that kicked out the dictator Batista out of Cuba. At that time, Cuba was still heavily under the influence because it was a colony of Spain, which is a very Catholic country, and the influence of the Catholic Church in Cuba not only brought along with it at the start of the revolution anti-gay attitudes, but also a lot of misogynist attitudes toward the women, which the Cubans over the years have, since the years of the revolution, have greatly wiped away. So many women are in powerful, important decision-making positions in Cuba. They're in the government, in the schools.
The same thing happened with race, right?
Yes. The Cubans trace their history. Fidel said that the Cubans are both Spanish and African, and many Cubans can trace a linkage back to Africa. As we know, slaves were brought to the southern part of the United States, but the overwhelming majority of slaves, if I'm correct, were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean. Brazil actually had more slaves than the United States. I didn't learn that until like the late 1980s. So the people of Cuba are able to directly trace a lot of the lineage back to not only Spain, but also Africa.
There's a lot of African culture that has survived the trip from Africa into Cuba. There's many vibrant African traditions alive in music, dance, religion, and
arts.
Artists. They were able to hang on to that lineage, I think, a little bit better than folks here in the United States were. Well, we can talk about Cuba for a long time. It's a very interesting place with all kinds of really interesting things happening there. And a lot of Americans have a lot of very undeveloped and very skewed and very uninformed opinions about what they think is happening in Cuba.
Yes, that's
so. You and I know better,
right?
Because we have the privilege of being able to go there and experience it. You went to South Africa too, right?
Yes, twice in the same year. Actually, in 2001, I went as part of People's Video Network crew. We were interviewing members of the South African Communist Party, and we had a chance to interview the then Vice President, Jacob Zuma, at the time. President Mandela was president at the time that we were there. And we were attempting to make a video movie of the life of Chris Hani, who was the chairman of the South African Communist Party that was assassinated by the apartheid government. And they were doing negotiations as to when they would actually have elections. Each time the ANC, under the leadership of the ANC, who would say, let's have this date, the South African apartheid government said, no, that won't work. And the ANC would come back with another proposed date. South African apartheid government said that won't work. And this pattern went on and on and on. Then the apartheid government assassinated Chris Hani, the chairman of the South African Communist Party. After that assassination, Nelson Mandela, at the next negotiations, went to them and told them, you have assassinated the chairman of the South African Communist Party. And at that time, the ANC said, there will be no more negotiations. This is the date where we will have the elections, to which ended up bringing about the end of the apartheid era in South Africa.
Oh.
So
that assassination played a key role in the downfall of apartheid.
Yes, it stopped the stalling of the apartheid government. The other time I went to the World Conference in South Africa later that year at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, there was a panel on the different continents around the world where people from that panel could come in and raise concerns. And I was there with a delegation from the US that went to raise the issue of Mumia Abu-Jamal, a political prisoner here in the United States.
Yeah.
And in walked Winnie Mandela to, of course, tremendous thunderous applause. And she didn't speak herself, but she came up and she took a seat among the panelists. So when I got up finally got called on to get up and speak about Mumia Abu-Jamal, I was able to turn and I just smiled at her, bowed and acknowledged her, and she, nodded her head back. And that was just a tremendous moment in my life.
I'll bet it was. You and I are so not done. We don't know what's next, but we know it's going to be hot, right?
Oh, well, I'm busy here in Baltimore organizing with the Socialist Unity Party, particularly fighting at this time of the nationwide, worldwide rebellions against the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rashid Brooks and Ahmaud Arbery. And I'm really heartened to see that some of the people that we did not know about, that weren't big names, that were killed 1, 2, 3 years ago, like that young child, Elijah McClain. Um, I think that was in Colorado. That was this 18-year-old child. He was just a baby. And I don't know, but as I watched the clips of him, I certainly think he might have been family also. So they've killed one of our children there. And the uprising around the entire world is just wonderful here, not only in the US, but in Great Britain, where they were marching first to, you know, to cry out against the killing of George Floyd, and then they turned it into a movement against racism there in England. So we have sparked something, and
You're right up in the middle of all that in Baltimore, right?
oh yes, there's no rest for the weary. At 66 years old, we're still out there organizing, pushing forward the class struggle, doing our best to show that capitalism has to go. Racism and sexism, misogyny is all the handiwork of capitalism, and getting rid of that and building a socialist system that meets the needs of the people, that respects the needs of the people, that respects the culture of the many different nationalities that make up the world is the only way.
Now we want to spend a little bit of time on music.
We have quite a legacy between the two of us. We really do.
It's really true. So you were a member of a choral group forever, right?
For quite a while.
Tell us about that.
I'm a member of the New Wave Singers of Baltimore. I joined them in around the end of January 1987. I have started singing when I was 15 years old in ninth grade chorus at Parkville Junior High in Baltimore County, Maryland. And from there, I went on to senior high school and was a member of the concert choir at Overley Senior High. So I had been singing for a number of years, and there developed in the United States what has become a tremendous musical movement of first the New York City Gay Men's Choir started, and then they started one in San Francisco, and if I'm correct, started one in Seattle. And those three, among some others, were a small group of choirs that initially came together to start this movement of gay men's choruses. We had a Baltimore men's chorus in Baltimore. It didn't have the word gay in the title, however, because we didn't have anti-discrimination ordinance that would prevent you from losing your job. So they simply were called the Baltimore men's chorus. And out of that, some of the members of that chorus wanted to also do things with women, so they came together with some other women, with women, and they formed our choir, which is called the New Wave Singers of Baltimore. Now, what is amusing, at the time, if you recall, there was a thing of music called New Wave music that was sort of punk rockish and stuff like that. But the reason our choir is called New Wave Music, it was meant to promote a new wave. Its theme was men and women singing together because there were men's choruses and women's choruses.
Oh,
and
I get it.
one of the earliest in the country of singing choruses that came together as a mixed chorus with both men and women.
Oh, I get it. So you have an association with Lavender Country. We're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yes.
In 2000, we had a little bit of a revival of Lavender Country after the Country Music Hall of Fame wrote the article about gay artists and country music. Featured Lavender Country, and that gave us an excuse to get back together and do a concert.
Right.
I had already met you. We'd already had our little fling in the office. And I asked you to come out to participate in that concert.
Much to my
Wow.
surprise, I remember when you asked me, you said, we're doing a revival and I need you to come out and sing of Lavender Country. And that's the first I'd ever heard of Lavender Country. You didn't tell me about that part, before. And I
We had our
recall,
priorities,
I said, "Oh, I didn't know you sang in a band." And he said, "Yeah, and I need you to come out and help," you said. And I recall I said to you, "Patrick Haggerty, how the hell am I going to come out and sing country music? I was raised on Motown." And you just said, "Oh, I'm sure you'll find a way." Well, sure enough, you were right.
After Lavender Country got re-released by Paradise the Bachelors in 2014, we picked you up again for a couple of shows.
Yes.
So you've been participating in Lavender Country periodically for a long time now.
We'll call it the East Coast.
The
East Coast group, yes. It was just a tremendous joy. I have loved singing all my life since I was a little boy, and like the young kids that say, "I'm gonna grow up and be a rapper." I used to say, "Oh, I'm gonna grow up and be a singer like James Brown and own my own airplane and radio station." That part never made it, and somewhere like 15 years after singing with the new wave singers, I was sitting one day just pondering life. And I said, "You know what, Andre? You did become a singer. You didn't become famous like James Brown and get your own airplane and radio station, but you've been singing with this choir for 15 years, something that you absolutely love to do." And to me, it's where the gay community and music, two of my greatest loves in life, come together. And then to be able to sing, to go out and sing in the 25th anniversary show of Lavender Country there in Seattle, that's like one of my top truly moments in life. And I have to thank you, Patrick, for thinking of me. I did it. I made it somehow, opening the show with Whoop-De-Doo and singing Straight White Patterns and I Can't Shake the Stranger Out of You. So many other songs that we had there. Walton Will, that's one of my favorite.
Revolutionary song.
Mm-hmm. Lavender Country had a message. Lavender Country's music teaches you. It also teaches you how to fight back.
You're going to sing a couple of songs for us today, right?
Yes.
Are you ready to pull yourself together and do that?
Sure. It's one of my favorites.
Andre Powell, fabulous revolutionary activist and marvelous singer, singing solo a cappella, "The Boy from Ipanema." Hit it, Andre.
Tall and tan and young and handsome, the boy from Ipanema goes walking, and when he passes each guy he passes goes, "Ah." When he walks he's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gentle, and when he passes each guy he passes goes, "Ooh-wee, oh." But I watch him so sadly. How can I tell him I love him? Yes, I would give my heart gladly. But each day when he walks to the sea, he'll look straight ahead, not at me. Tall and tan and young and handsome, the boy from Ipanema goes walking, and when he passes I smile, but he doesn't see. He doesn't see me, kung kung chikung. He doesn't see me, kung kung chikung. He doesn't see me. He just doesn't see. That is my rendition of the version that is on the Supremes at the Copa, going back to 1965, that Dinah Ross and the Supremes did. As they were headlining the Copa, they were one of the first Black acts to break through the barriers in those days and play at the Copacabana Theater, which opened the door to many other Black artists to sing in the Copacabana.